Stacks of rusting automobiles. Mountains of man-made debris, where tons of refuse come to be torched, wrecked, and shredded. But what seems like the end of the road is really a new lease on life. Now, junkyards on Modern Marvels. Junkyards, scrapyards, boneyards, call them what you will. They conjure nightmarish images of snarling dogs. And they're always located on the wrong side of the tracks. But the name is misleading. They are homes to almost everything that is aged, smashed, or just doesn't work anymore. But unlike garbage, everything in the junkyard has value, either as second-hand goods or as recyclable material.
We could call this a resource yard. We could call this an environmental yard, different from anything you'll ever see anyplace else, and something that is a key component to American society and the American economy. Go to a junkyard. Just take a slow look around, because you're not looking at junk. You're looking at money.
Money by the ton. Just as currency comes in all shapes and sizes, so do junkyards and the material in them. The metal scrapyard is just one type of junkyard. Anything made of metal, from industrial equipment to household appliances, is accepted. Eventually, everything here will be sold to metal manufacturers for recycling. Steel from demolished buildings, railroad tracks, and crushed automobiles seem to chaotically litter these yards. But everything here has a price, purpose, and place.
The trucks are coming in, basically, they come in and they dump at different areas in the yard depending on the commodity of the material.
With each truck bringing nearly 80,000 pounds of metal, the scrapyard can run out of space fast. For workers, compressing and compacting the huge piles of debris is a major part of the job. The mill is the tool of choice for light gauge metal. The adage, separation is painful, has never been truer. The mill at the Hugo New Proler scrapyard in Long Beach, California, has been operating for nearly 40 years. Old cars make up a majority of its diet. Multiple conveyor belts move the metal into and out of the machine. Inside this tower lies the heart of the contraption, the grinder. An enormous drum, bristling with 24 swivel hammers, spins at almost 450 revolutions per minute, pulverizing everything it touches. Grinding takes its toll on the mill, and the hammers must be periodically replaced. Workers remove the housing and move into the belly of the beast. With safety locks in place, the men carefully detach the old hammers. The new hammers, weighing nearly 400 pounds each, are lowered in by crane and secured. With the mill back in action, pounded debris streams from the grinding chamber.
It goes across a sequence of magnets and through a blower, which sucks off all of the non-metallics, along with the carpets, the styrofoam, and that goes into another direction.
A conveyor belt deposits the scrap back into the yard. Because of their mill, Hugo New Proler boasts one of the largest parking lots in the world. Only to find your car, you'll need to bring a shovel. But some of the metal that enters the scrapyard is even too tough for the mill. Any material over a quarter-inch thick is sent to the 2,000-ton shearer. Up to 6 tons of scrap is loaded into the shearer by a grappling claw crane. Hydraulic compactors bend and fold the metal until it's shaped like a loaf of bread. A 32-foot-long gather cylinder pushes the scrap towards the blades. The giant shears chew through the emerging scrap. The cutting surface is actually 5 blades, 3 above and 2 on the bottom. Each is 34 inches long and nearly 5 inches thick. The scrapyard is a processing plant, and the metal doesn't stay long. Most of the material leaves the Hugo Neuproller yard on ocean-going scrap ships. This ship, bound for a Korean steel mill, is over 600 feet in length and loaded with nearly 30,000 tons.
Most people's junk is another person's gold, you know, it's a gold mine. We don't look at it as junk, we look at it as scrap, and it's worth something to everybody.
And that has always been true. Recycling and reusing things is nothing new. For early humans, gathering raw materials was extremely difficult. Miners in 4500 BC struggled to collect copper in the mountains of what is today Serbia. They managed to dig multiple shafts, some up to 60 feet deep, using picks made from deer antlers. With commodities acquired at such a high price, early humans were very frugal, finding it easier to reuse something than to create it anew.
I think honestly that human beings recycled as soon as they made the first artifact. They always focused on ways to use something in as many ways as possible, and then if it broke, to figure out another way they could use it.
Early craftsmen took recycling one step further by reusing pieces from abandoned structures to create new buildings. Pieces from some of the greatest monuments of the ancient world found their way into new creations. In the 1500s, Spanish conquistadors in Mexico destroyed Aztec buildings to construct their own cities. Centuries before, parts of the Roman Colosseum morphed into St. Peter's Basilica. Even the mighty Colossus of Rhodes was scrapped by invaders to make tools and weapons.
Part of the reason that metal was so important to these people was it took a tremendous amount of skill and energy to forge it into the original implement, whether it was a helmet or a sword or chainmail or whatever else.
Weapons such as swords and spears could ensure a king's authority and were prized by early royalty and scrap collectors alike.
Archaeologists that dig up battlefields are really frustrated people, because originally, years ago, we thought that when you dig up a battlefield, you're going to find helmets and swords and chainmail and all this kind of stuff.
On one such battlefield, the fate of England was decided. In 1066, 7,000 Norman troops invaded Britain under the command of William I. The English king, Harold II, raised an army of 7,000 to repulse the attack. The two forces met on the battlefield of Hastings. When the fighting had ended, nearly 3,500 men lay dead, including the English king, clearing the way for William to become England's first Norman monarch.
In 1966, the British archaeologists decided that they would dig up the battlefield because they had all these reports. They knew where the battlefield was, they knew where the archers were, and the longbowmen were, and the spearmen were, and the sword fighters were, and all this, and they were going to recreate the battle in the archaeological remains. And all they got were some teeth and bones and very little else. The metal is gone, and the reason it's gone is the dead soldiers were picked clean for any valuables, especially metal.
The dead weren't the only ones plundered for scrap metal. When the pirate Captain Kidd was captured in 1699, Included in his treasure was 10 tons of scrap iron. But the Industrial Revolution and cheap mass-produced steel removed metal from the most wanted list.
With the Industrial Revolution, there were a lot of scrap yards, but the real focus for the scrap dealers was rags. And the important thing was the value of those rags in making paper, to the point where a ton of rags, for most of the time from the 1600s all the way up to the 1900s, was as valuable relatively as a ton of aluminum is today. It was really where the money was.
But Western Railroad expansion in the 1800s changed the rag business forever. With new access to a seemingly endless forest at hand, companies learned to mass-produce paper from lumber. The vagrant rag pickers were out of a job. The ones that chose to stay in the junk business were forced to shift their focus. Metal, wagon parts, and building materials became the lifeblood for the junk industry. The goods collected were resold as second-hand, or broken down to be recycled. The 19th century image of the junk man and his horse-drawn wagon became an enduring, albeit low-class symbol of American society.
My mother right now is 100 years old, almost 101, and she always told the story about the Shine brothers from Spencer. They came around on the farm every spring, and they would ask if we had any old pots and pans, and they would trade it for a broom. And they came around with a horse and buggy to pick up this stuff.
But the often maligned junkyard and junk industry managed to gain popularity during the First and Second World Wars. Scrap metal from the yards helped feed the war machine.
With World War II, metal took on an even more important strategic role, and the government began to pack rat everything. And it was scrap dealers, scrap paper, scrap metal, who were part of the core of this and who were really seeing to it that our war effort had a metal backbone.
Despite their wartime triumph, junkyards rarely received the respect they deserved. During the 1960s, Lady Bird Johnson crusaded to keep America beautiful. The humble junkyard was one of her first targets. Lawmakers passed ordinances prohibiting yards to exist within eyesight of major highways. Many junkyards were forced to build large perimeter walls, not to keep out intruders, but to keep from being seen. Today, these one-time eyesores are getting a second look. Evolving thoughts about the economy and ecology have changed the junkyard's image. And what was once considered second-hand garbage is now seen as pure gold. Next, America's love of the automobile puts junkyards in every city. Considered England's first great poet, the 14th century writer Geoffrey Chaucer was employed by the king to keep track of the country's scrap metal. Junkyards will return on Modern Marvels. The end of the road. Since the first cars rolled off Henry Ford's assembly line, Americans have loved their automobiles. But when love dies, it ends up here. The automobile salvage yard. In the U.S., nearly 11 million cars are retired each year, enough to fill a 4-lane highway from New York to Los Angeles. Yet it's rare to see even one vehicle abandoned on the side of the road. That's because every car has life left in it, if you know where to look.
You would really be surprised at the level of expertise in a place like this, in a junkyard. And these are people that can divide hubcaps into 150 or 200 types, know exactly where they are, know exactly how to clean them up, get them out, put them on your car, and get you out of there.
By reselling used parts, automobile salvage yards have perfected ways of squeezing every last mile out of an automobile. They are modern-day assembly lines.